Hey, yo, I want to talk about Poker Faces, a secret lair, and more importantly, the commander deck that seeing these cards inspired me to create. And let me ask you a question. Do you have too much money? Do you have a photographic memory or an encyclopedic knowledge of every card? Do you hate other people and want them to hate you? Well, do I have a deck tech for you? 100 cards of pure spite. Let me show you. Zoom in. We start, of course, with our commander, who for this deck is going to be Omnath, Locus of Creation. He's 4 colour, everything but black, and the card draw on enter is nice, but we're mostly going to be running him for his second ability, which, luckily for us, is nice and easy to understand and remember. Clean and simple, no confusions as to what this card does, I'm sure. Now, we're going to run Rampant Growth and Harrow to trigger Omnath's Landfall ability, but also to act as ramp. And speaking of ramp, we have Soul Ring, because this is a commander deck after all. And interestingly, Luca, Bound to Ruin, who, as you can clearly see, has a +1 ability that adds red and green mana to help us cast our creature spells or activate creature abilities. Now, for card draw, we have both Tidings and Harmonize, as obvious includes that get the job done. But also Treasure Hunt and Ponder, which achieve a similar result but with an added touch of randomness for some spice. We also have the One Ring, because not every card in our deck is an oldie, and Ajani, Sleeper Agent, who lets us draw a card as long as it's a creature or other planeswalker. Which is likely, we already have Luca, but also a few others like Nihiri the Unforgiving and Tamio, Completed Sage. Both of whom bring value to the deck but also have their own ways to gain us cards, so I'm listing them here under the category of card draw. For our next category, Path to Exile is almost an auto-include in this deck as it exemplifies our main game plan of upsetting our opponents, in an attempt to make them wish they'd never played in the first place. Which is why we're also running Celestial Purge. It's not as good, but will specifically upset anyone who dared to run black or red cards against us. Condemn and Reciprocate aren't quite as situational as Celestial Purge, but also not as convenient as Path to Exile. However, they do achieve similar results, and so are included here too. These are all real Magic cards, by the way. As far as I can tell, this deck is totally legal, as long as you can remember what everything does, I suppose. And Wizards do keep insisting on printing more and more cards without any readable text, which is fine for simple, memorable, or iconic cards like Rampant Growth, but look at that secret lair again. Let's play a quick game. I'll pick one. Coffin Queen. Look at that card. Now, do you know what it does? Let me know in the comments. I'll give you a second before I tell you. Pause the video if you need. Because Coffin Queen's Oracle text reads, you may choose not to untap Coffin Queen during your untap step. Spend 2 mana and a black and tap it to put a target creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. When Coffin Queen becomes untapped or you lose control of Coffin Queen, exile that creature. Did you get it? Would you remember all of that without text? They don't pick the easy ones to remember. I have to assume the intent of these cards is to be confusing to play with. So okay, let's get back to that deck tech then. Now where were we? Oh yeah, targeted removal. We have Oxidize to deal with artifacts, Disenchant to deal with artifacts and enchantments, Beast Within to deal with any permanents at the cost of giving our opponent a token creature, and Nissa Ascended Animist to repeatedly destroy artifacts and enchantments at the cost of her loyalty. We have the classic Lightning Bolt and Burst Lightning pulling double duty as both potential removal or single target damage to a player, but they're not alone as we also have Incinerate doing the same thing, Searing Blast doing the same thing but with a nice synergy to Omnath's Landfall ability, Fireball doing the same thing again but on a larger scale if we have the mana, Flame Javelin also doing the same but without the need for red mana, Lightning Helix doing the same but proving you don't have to be mono red, and finally Psionic Blast to do the same again but without the need for red at all. Now, let's take a look at all of our cards so far. That is a lot of single target damage or removal, which admittedly isn't great in a multiplayer game. But if you're not looking to win and instead aiming to just tilt one person specifically at your table, this deck is perfect. Speaking of cards that will tilt someone, Counterspell is our next pick, alongside its more expensive cousin, Cancel. But what good is a deck with only 2 counters in it? So we're also running Remove Soul for creature spells, Negate for non-creature spells, Hinder to tuck the card you countered, really upsetting some people, Mental Misstep for an early game counter, Mana Leak for an actually quite punishing soft counter, Mana Tithe for a surprise counter in white or when tapped on blue, and finally the GOAT, Cryptic Command, which you may just want for the card draw alone, to be honest. And because Cryptic Command is clearly so versatile, as you can see, I'm also going to list Recollect here too, which is just going to let us cast any of our previous spells again. Incredibly powerful, and frustrating for your opponents to watch, I'm sure. But don't worry, not every spell in this deck is single target. We're running Pyroclasm and Volcanic Fallout to deal mass damage, most likely upsetting any token decks. And if that's not enough, we obviously also have Day of Judgment and the pinnacle of board wipes, Wrath of God, for when things are really going poorly and you just need a clean slate. Wrath of God is the sort of card that can get away with being textless. This one is okay. Let's take this opportunity to have a look at all of our cards again. God, look at it. Just over 40 cards of nonsense so far. Be honest, we already went over this card, but do you remember what I said it did, or why it's in the deck? Imagine if someone was actually playing this deck against you, how would you feel seeing all of these cards? Again, let me know in the comments and like and subscribe while you're down there. I for one would be miserable seeing all of these. I think I'd hate this deck even if I were the one playing it. Which I suppose was the very intention of it, and I did say at the start of the video everyone would hate this, so I guess mission accomplished then. Yay! Anyway, aside from Omnath, we don't have any creatures yet, so let's add some in. And what better creature for a landfall deck than Elish Norn, Mother of Machines. I'm sure our opponent will love seeing all of our landfall triggers happen twice. And if that's not infuriating enough, let's add in Grand Cenobite too, because there's nothing better than playing against someone who just made all of your creatures -2/-2. This deck has a lot of instants and sorceries, so let's have Ginger Taxius Progress Tyrant in here so we can double up on all of that goodness. And we'll add in Core Augur as well, because we're still a little light on card draw, and I'm sure our opponent wouldn't want us to miss out on casting all of these fun spells at them. Speaking of casting spells, Urabrask, Heretic Praetor, is here to give us an extra card at the start of our upkeep to cast each turn, and we're adding in his Hidden Alternate because our opponents will be thrilled to have their creatures enter tapped from here on out. But this is a lot of cards we're getting all of a sudden. Will we have enough ramp? Fear not, Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger is next, to make sure that we never run out of mana. And let's add in his Monstrous Raider version too. Admittedly, this card's not doing quite so much for this deck, however his inclusion is going to muddy the waters as to which fucking version of Vorinclex we have out currently, which in turn will help make our opponents' brains bleed out of their ears trying to remember what the fuck all of these cards actually do, and which version of each rule-setting Praetor we currently have in play. Every board state with this deck will be a nightmare. You know what else will help with that? How about a creature with Infect? Glistener Elf is only a 1/1, but Infect and Poison counters are yet another mechanic to add to our opponent's mental load of things they have to keep track of. Praise the Lord there aren't any textless versions of dungeons or sticker cards. Yet. Let's also include Blighted Agent too for the same reason as the Elf, but what's fun about this card specifically is that it's unblockable. I would put money on your opponent forgetting they can't block it basically every time you attack with it. And let's take this opportunity to add a Professional Facebreaker so that we can get even more benefit from dealing combat damage to our opponent in the form of treasure tokens. And hey, look, it's the first card from that secret lair that inspired this whole ridiculous deck. Let's throw the other two legal ones in here too. Jaxis the Troublemaker lets us create a token of another one of our creatures, but with so much of our stuff being legendary, this isn't great. And Goblin King gives our other goblins +1/+1 and Mountain Walk. But we don't have any other goblins in this deck. Honestly though, at this point I'm not sure that matters. I think having more blank status changing permanents on the board is probably already enough to drive everyone to rage quit. Like, let's take Jedit Ojin in here. It's a 7 mana 5/5. Do you know what it does? What would your reaction be if somebody played this? And while Commander is usually a casual format between friends, and I would say the #1 rule should always be don't be a dick, make sure people are having fun. However, if we go to a professional level, the rules do allow you to lie or withhold information about certain things. If we take a look at magicjudge.org, breaking down the rules of the game, they state that there's 4 different types of information that players have to consider. Private information, like what you have in your hand or in your library. Status information, things like your life total, who the current monarch is, not really important to my point right now. But the other 2 are free information, which is information to which all players are entitled access without contamination or omissions made by their opponents. Okay, sounds applicable here until you realise that that only includes details of current game actions and past game actions that still affect the game state, the name of any visible object, the number and type of any counter that isn't defined as status information, the state and current zone of any object or player, the game score, and what the current step or phase of the turn is in. Which leaves us with derived information, which is information to which all players are entitled access, but opponents are not obliged to assist in determining and may require some skill or calculation to determine. For my point, this specifically relates to this bit that says game rules, tournament policies, oracle text, and any other information pertaining to the current tournament. And then, cards are considered to have their oracle text printed on them. Before I really underline my point, let's look at their example. A player is not obliged to assist their opponent with game rules, tournament policy, oracle text, or any other information pertaining to the current tournament. For example, if a player asks their opponent what a card does, for example, a player does not have to give all of the information about the card. Their opponent may say that a Vampire Nighthawk is a flying 2/3 creature and admit that it has Death Touch and Lifelink. And remember, cards are considered to have their oracle text printed on them. So back to Jedit Ojanen, and I'm no judge, but it sounds to me like a perfectly legal answer to the question, what is that card, is it is a creature. An answer to, what does it do, is legally attack and block without any further context. Now again, this is for a professional level, not so much casual, the rules are technically different, but seemingly every one of these cards is designed on the principle of, I don't have to tell you shit, look it up yourself. Does that sound terrible? Yeah, I agree. And now we have enough of these cards that I could make an entire commander deck out of them. And yet, Wizards keep printing cards with unreadable text, text covered over, or no fucking text at all. So okay, if that's the world that we live in, then this is the kind of deck that we get. Moonshaker Cavalry and Psychosis Crawler make up our last two creatures, and if you don't know what they do, well that's seemingly by design, so I guess look it up. We have a couple of artifacts in the form of Batterskull and Norn's Annex, the latter of those two also being a choice if you want to frustrate your opponents. God, I hate what I've created here. And for good measure, let's add in Giant Growth and Jace the Perfected Mind. Two cards that, if I'm being honest, are just plain old fun to play with. Giant Growth is a staple, and what can I say, I like Mill. We're still a little light on creatures, so for lands, we want Inkmoth Nexus and Dryad Arbor, because if you know the history of that second card at least, of course it would be in here. This is Commander, so let's have both a Command Tower and a Reliquary Tower, staples in the format, printed with textless versions, cool. I found this Terramorphic Expanse, which is kind of the opposite of what I was complaining about in this video, but I did laugh when I saw it, and it feels in keeping. Plus, this deck has no dual lands, so the mana base could really use some help. And finally, for basic lands, we've got a fairly even split of colours, so let's go 8 copies of each basic. Do they have to be these specific printings with the rules text on how lands work painstakingly spelled out on them? Yes, they do. And that's the deck. Do you hate it as much as I do? I suspect it's terrible to play as well, and will not win matches. I like the artwork, I think the cards are beautiful, I just question why so many cards with overly complicated mechanics get printed without rules text. Is Magic the Gathering a constantly online game? Are we meant to be constantly looking up oracle text? Is that why WotC have got so comfortable with erratas and changing rules text and card types? So what do you think? I think this sucks, in design and in principle. But I have spoken to several of you in the comments about how you love to proxy cards or test up my dumb suggestions like making Pokemon cards playable in Magic or cooking my recipe for magic pancakes. If that's you and you have some people you want to upset, feel free to give this deck a go. Let me know how it goes in the comments. You know, just don't blame me when everyone gets angry. You have been warned. Thank you very much for watching this video, and thank you to everyone that supports me, like James Diamond, Eggboy the particle that permeates all existence, and the rest of my patrons whose names are on screen now. I'd also like to thank the sponsor for this video, me on my Patreon page, where you can get your name credited on screen too. Check it out in the link in the description below. Hit the like button, leave a comment, install an ad block. Most importantly, subscribe and share this video with a friend if you have any left after having played this deck against them. Hit the notification bell and do all those things the algorithm loves. If you agree or disagree with any of my points, or you want to see me do a video on another subject, let me know and I will see you next time.